Welcome to the world of trains. On this program, we are going to look at 3 operating model railroads and what it takes to produce models of such detail and realism. Jim Laughlin built and operates this superb HO layout. This is an O-gauge layout exquisitely detailed by Charlie Brown. Roger Smith's impressive N-gauge has all the details of the larger scales. It's fun watching these miniature trains operate, but there's more to a great model railroad than meets the eye. To find out what lies under the finished model, we visit the HO Club in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
A little bit of the hobby and for everybody. It's also good for people of all ages. Young children get their first train set for Christmas and enjoy watching the trains run and do many different things with them. And as they get older, they want to do more things. They want to get into more complex track, bigger layouts, more complex scenery, building kits, the buildings and the bridges and the things that make it look like people really live on the railroad, and adding little figures and cars and things to make it look like people actually are trying to run the railroad, only they're in miniature. Welcome to the Baton Rouge Model Railroad Club. My name is Craig Ellert. I'm the president. Our layout is modeled in HO scale, which is a scale of 1 to 87. In other words, for every foot that you see on the model railroad, you have 87 feet on a real railroad. This is probably the most popular scale to model in. The other scales are O scale, which is twice the size of HO, and N scale, which is about half the size of HO. HO blends all of the being able to do all the scenery and the detail work of O scale in much less space, and allows you to operate the trains and stuff that you would be able, the lengths of trains that you would be able to operate in N scale. We want to walk through the layout a little bit. We'll show you where our bench work is, how it works, and how we constructed this layout out here. Bench work is basically an L-girder frame with 1x2 joists from which we can support the risers that support the track and the roadbed. Okay, this is an L-girder. It's basically 2 1x2s put on top of each other in the form of an L. This is the vertical member and then a horizontal member. And on the back of this is a space that we can put screws in from the bottom up through into the joist to support everything above that point. It's held up by 2x4s that stick down all the way to the ground, and there's basically just attached to the floor. And it comes up and attaches, screws onto the L-girder main frame. Okay. The L-girder main frames then hold up a joist like this, which we also made out of 1x2 pieces of pine. And these joists are used to hold up the roadbed in various different elevations throughout the layout. This way we have a light structure that we can move the joists around and make different elevations and make it very flexible. If we want to change some track from one location to another, we can do that very easily by taking the screws out and moving it back and forth. The joists hold up risers that will hold up a support for the roadbed. The risers are screwed onto the joist, and then they hold up a cleat that holds up, that is screwed into the bottom of the roadbed, that holds the roadbed up. It's a very rigid structure, won't move if you bump into it. We adjust the elevation of the layout depending on where the track's going. We try to, we've drawn out a layout for the track, and the different directions of the track, we try to get some variety in how the trains operate through the area. And by changing from one elevation to another, we can add scenic relief, make it look as it would appear to be going up and down a mountain. And so you can see by putting the different sizes of elevations in there, we can get some vertical relief and make the terrain appear to go up and down hills. And it takes a number of guys, 2 or 3 people usually, to do bench work of this complexity.
Right on schedule, the express train pulls out of Laughlin Yard as it begins the run to Childress. Now back to the HO Club for more behind-the-scenes looks at model railroading.
When you lay the bench work, the whole point is to design it so that it will support the layout that you want to build. And that basic shape doesn't take place until you start to put the sub-road bed down, which is a plywood that goes underneath the track. When you put the plywood down, then you can start to see where the tracks are going to go, and you can start to get a visual interpretation of what the actual layout is going to be. It becomes a little bit easier then to visualize also what the scenery will be in its future state at the end, once the layout is finished. One of the things that you want to watch out for as you build layout, the track and the sub-road bed, is that you get your grades between the elevation changes so that they're not too steep, and so your locomotives and cars can go up and down the grades with ease, and you don't have to end up cutting the trains in half or something like that. Grades have always been a major obstacle for real railroads. They are also for a model railroad. Some of the best real railroads have had difficulties going across the mountains. That happens to be also the best way to make a model railroad. It's more interesting if it goes up and down, and it looks like it goes up and down hills and around corners and over bridges and rivers and streams. But you still have to be careful that you don't make the grades too steep so that your fastest passenger train has to slow down to a crawl to go up and down the hill. It's not very realistic. Another thing that you want to be careful of as you lay out the layout is that the minimum radius of your curves will handle all the equipment that you're planning to operate with ease. You don't want to put a real tight radius curve that you would find in a yard on a main line where you're going to run long passenger trains. The passenger trains would tend to derail, you'll have operating problems, and they just don't look right. So the radius out here, the minimum radius, is somewhere over 3 feet, and all of our equipment that we plan to run will look good on this layout as we walk through as we get our trains running in the future. Once your framework is built and your sub-road bed is laid down, you know where you're going to run trains to and therefore run your tracks. The next step is to go ahead and put the road bed on, which is either, like I said before, cork or pine strips that you would use for the ballast later on. Then you lay your track on top of that, be it either hand-laid track or flexible track. Laying out your yards and all your tracks, your passing tracks, wherever you're going to run trains, you go ahead and get that done.
A powerful steam locomotive heads into the engine yard to replenish its supply of fuel oil and water before continuing a long day of hauling freight. To find out what powers these miniature engines, we go back to the Baton Rouge HO Club.
The next step is to wire the layout, and we wired our layout by running wires down out, soldering the wires on the sides of the rails to where you wouldn't see them once the layout is detailed. And then all the wiring is run underneath the layout where it will be hidden by the scenery. The wiring is run from the individual blocks or sections of track to a main control panel, and from there you can operate two or three or four trains from one location. The wiring is designed so that you can electrically isolate one section of the track and run multiple trains at different times at different places on the layout. There's probably 15 to 20 miles worth of wiring here in this location, going in different parts of the layout for different purposes. Each of the switch machines that power the turnout so you can control the direction of the trains is also wired so that you can remotely operate that from one or more locations, control locations throughout the room. We've also lined or wired for lights to control or show the direction of the turnouts are thrown, so that we, from one location, we can tell which way the train is going to go. If we don't want it to go that way, we can then throw a switch to make it go a different direction. The most complicated wiring takes place underneath a yard, where there's a number of switch machines and a number of tracks. And it's sometimes a nightmare to get under there and figure out which way the wires are supposed to go so that you can control trains in the right direction. Another part of the wiring that's usually not very fun for people is that you have to work underneath the layout, working over your head. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and it takes a lot of work to get under there and figure out which way you want to run the wires and then get it done. Most of our connections are made, other than to the track, are made with crimped on connections that we can screw to terminal blocks to allow us to change those wires if we ever need to. If we have a bad connection or we have need to reroute the power to a different location, we can do that without changing the wire up to the track. Each one of the yards will have its own control panel that will control all the functions in that yard. And then the main line is controlled from our main control cab that we have, that you can see the whole room from. So we could probably keep 3 people busy in the control cab and 1 at each one of our yards, and then 1 or 2 people on our narrow gauge layout that we have as part of the overall complex. So we could have probably 8 or 9 people running trains when we get into the operation part of the layout.
A long freight train backs into Laughlin Yard, where it will be broken up. The freight cars dispatched to other trains taking cargo to all parts of the country. Again, back to the HO Club to see what brings a model to life.
The cardboard strips that you see on the side of the layout are temporary things that we put up to, in the unfortunate event of a derailment, we've put those up to catch pieces of equipment from falling all the way to the floor and meeting an untimely death. So we put these up temporarily until we get all our scenery built. At that point in time, the scenery will be designed such that a train derailing will not fall all the way to the floor. We'll be able to pick it up without breaking it. The scenery base is in our model railroad is we use wire screen, which is basically the screen that comes off of a screen door as our base. Scenery does a number of things on a model railroad, and the most important is that it shows you or gives you a real view that you're actually running trains through a real live scene. It adds some realism to the model railroad, completes the picture. You do scenery in 3 dimensions, therefore you show some elevation change and things like that. The purposes for scenery are you design your scenery based on the type of terrain you're modeling for a model railroad. Some people model a mountainous type terrain, and therefore they'll have a lot of elevation between their tracks, a lot of tight curves, and a lot of places for large rock outcroppings or or mountains to appear. Typically we'll have small streams running through or large streams with occasional waterfall or two on the layout. When you do that, it becomes a very attractive thing to look at. Other layouts are modeled in the eastern part of the United States or in the southern part of the United States, and the terrain in those areas is typically more hilly instead of mountainous, and the trees or the terrain has trees on it instead of bare rock outcroppings. So in our particular case, our layout is modeled after the area of North Louisiana and up into Mississippi, and we have rolly hills and we have a lot of tree-covered hillsides with an occasional tunnel here and there and some rock outcroppings along the way. So that's the type of scenery that we've modeled. By using the scenery to separate the layers of track, you show a reason for the track to be separated. The scenery kind of flows out of the track design, where tracks are close together and separated a lot vertically. You put in a rock cliff to do that, but where they're further apart and separated not very high vertically, then you can put in a rolly hill, a gentle hill, or even just a flat plain, and you can model the appropriate vegetation for that part of the layout. Where you have a tunnel, a need that the railroad would actually have to go into a mountain, you can put in what would be called a tunnel portal. And the tunnel portal is a representation of the physical entrance into the hillside. And what you do is establish that the point of the tunnel start by putting either a replica of a tunnel portal, such as we have here in our layout, or you can just use a rock casting that would show an inch, a hole blown out of the mountain where you drive your train in through on the track into the mountain. Once we get the way we construct the scenery is to take the wire screen and staple it to the sides of the sub-road bed, the plywood sub-road bed, and then we bend and twist and show the general evolution of the terrain that we're modeling. In our particular case, it's rolly hills, so you put a little bit of undulation in the screen and kind of give it its basic shape with the wire screen. Upon a wire screen, we take a plaster soaked piece of paper and lay it right on top of the screen. And then once that's hard, then you can put on top of that, you can put some more plaster or rock castings, which are a simulation of a rock outcropping to reveal what the terrain would look like once you're done with your model. The general shape of this is controlled by the plaster, and you can make the plaster different thicknesses to make it different strengths. The plaster over wire screen that we use is a very hard, very strong thing where you can actually put some weight on it if you happen to lean against it when you're picking up a piece of rolling stock, or when people come to visit and they bump up against it, they won't hurt the scenery by bumping against it. It's well suited for this type of layout. It's a permanent construction. It's very heavy. If you're building a portable layout, you may want to consider a different type of scenery construction, such as styrofoam or paper mache. That's a little lighter. They're probably not as strong as the plaster, though, and so for our particular case, we felt like we needed the strength of the plaster, and that's why we put that in out here. On the track, as you're laying the scenery, you want to protect the track and the area underneath the layout by putting plaster or masking tape down or newspaper to keep the plaster from getting into places that you don't want it to. It becomes a large mess to clean up the plaster if you don't properly protect the areas underneath it that it'll fall onto as you construct your scenery. Once you finish with the plaster and you get it to the shape, the general shape that you want, you can put detailed rock outcroppings in by two methods. One, you can put in rock castings, which are a latex casting or a latex mold taken on a real rock out in the real world, and then once that mold is made, then you can fill it with plaster and take that plaster piece of rock and put it on the model railroad and then stain it to look like the real rock, give it the coloration that it would appear out in nature. The other method is to put a layer of plaster onto the to the base of the scenery and then carve it, physically carve it with a knife to give yourself what would be a simulation of a stratified rock or a sedimentary rock. Very good way to make a detailed rock outcropping on part of your layout. Once the rocks and the general shape of the terrain is made, then you can lay or color the plaster to look like dirt and rocks, and then above that you can put what we call ground foam as a way to make grasses and shrubs, and then you can make trees out of ground foam and lichen and bits and pieces of smaller plants that simulate what a trunk would look like on a tree. There are many ways to make trees. You can make both the deciduous trees like an oak tree, or you can make a pine tree and model them very realistically and make a very real scene on the model railroad just by putting a few small pieces of wood and plaster and lichen and ground foam together and painting it. It'll come out to be a very realistic piece of nature in miniature. Scenery is a lot of fun in that you can get messy, you can do it real fast, you can make a large area of the model railroad look real in a very short period of time, and then you can come back and fill in the details and make it much more attractive and much more pleasing to the eye. It's also the most rewarding part of the layout for a lot of people in that it makes it look like it's something instead of just a big piece of wood with a bunch of wires and tracks hanging out from underneath it. So it actually completes the picture of the model railroad. It makes it look like what you're trying to model is really coming to life. It adds the third dimension to the model railroad and makes it more realistic for what we're trying to accomplish.
Retired to the engine house, this locomotive is finished for the day. Yet another carries on. Moving freight is a 24-hour-a-day business. Once again, we go back to the Baton Rouge HO Club.
One of the fun things about building scenery is that things that are found in nature don't have a scale, in that if you look at a small plant, it takes the general shape of a large tree. Therefore, you can use the basic structure of the small plant, such as a sagebrush, to make a model shape would be a 40 or 50 foot tall tree. Then by putting foliage on a tree, either lichen or ground foam or something like that, you can make the tree take a shape and give it life. So you don't just have to model dead trees. Also a rock, if you were to take a rock, you can make a rock that does not have scale to it. You can make a rock look really good in an N scale, HO scale, or O scale, just like it would out into in the real world. So therefore you can take almost anything out of nature and put it on a model railroad and make it look like it belongs and make it look like it's to scale. Another part of the scenery that's of a lot of interest to most people is the building of the structures that go on the model railroad. If you look at any town or city that the railroad goes through, there are some distinctive structures that fit with a model railroad theme, and we try to build those things so that they look like they're a real part of our railroad out here in our club. Stations and industries and houses and things that people live and work in are also a part of our model railroad. And it's a whole different facet of the hobby to build scenery, the structures that go into the scenery. They give a place for the model people to live, for them to work, and they also give a place for them to drive their cars to and from, and for the trains to go to and from. So it's something that we try to pay a lot of attention to. You can come up with a lot of different ways to build structures. There are a lot of kits available that you can build a kit in a number of hours that, without even painting it, looks pretty good to put onto a model railroad. Or you can build a craftsman type kit that takes a number of hours to build, 30 or 40 hours to build. Or you can scratch build a kit. You can take a particular prototype building and take drawings, make drawings of it, dimension it, and then build that kit up without anything to guide you other than your imagination, and actually recreate that building in miniature through different methods of construction. By painting the structures, you can make them look very realistic. You can make them look brand new, or you can make them look weather beaten and falling down. You can make the shingles look like they're brand new, newly laid, or you can make them look like they've been through a lot of tornado storms and parts of them torn off. You can make buildings sag. Older buildings tend to sag, and you can make buildings look that way. So there's an endless variety by taking plastic kits or wooden kits or scratch building things and make the scenery fit into your particular layout. Another facet of the scenery is building bridges. Bridges are built to cover streams or roads or other parts of the railroad. And by putting the bridges together, you show a reason for one track to cross another track, or for a change in elevation from one part of the layout to the other to be realistic. By putting a stream and modeling a stream at the bottom of a canyon, you can make a very detailed scene and something that's very eye-catching and something that people would like to pay attention to as they come through and view the layout. So bridges become a very good focal point on the model railroad, something that adds a little variety to the scenery and brings a reason for elevation and changes. Model railroading is an activity that it is a lot of fun. It's something that people enjoy doing because there's many different things you can do. You can do carpentry work, construction work, wiring work, scenery work. People make a hobby or even a profession out of photographing railroads. So there's many different things that you can do in the railroad. Just operating the trains is something that people like to do. Or you can go ahead and get a layout done, get the trains running, get it fully scenic, and just enjoy watching trains run.
We hope you've gotten a better understanding of what goes into and under a great model train layout. In future programs, we will get into a more detailed discussion and demonstrations of each of the different phases of building a model railroad. Model railroading is fun, and we hope you will join us in discovering this wonderful hobby.